Thank you, Judy. Our gospel lesson this morning is found in the book of John, chapter 6, verses 1 through 27. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. Then a great multitude followed him, because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread, that these may eat?" But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many?" Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was so much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost." Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself, alone. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and went over the sea toward Capernaum. And it was already dark, and Jesus had not come to them. Then the sea arose, because a great wind was blowing. So when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea, drawing near to the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. On the following day, when the people who were standing on the other side of the sea saw that there was no other boat there except the one which his disciples had entered, and that Jesus had not entered the boat with his disciples, but his disciples had gone away alone. However, other boats came from Tiberias, near the place where they ate bread after the Lord had given thanks. When the people therefore saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they also got into boats and came to Capernaum seeking Jesus. And when they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Jesus answered them and said, "Most assuredly I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled. Do not labor for food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal on him." May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. I want to thank Pastor Doug for letting me preach today. It is a joy always to come before you with a message, and I hope I continue to earn your praise and gratitude as we continue our ministry. When I was researching for today's sermon, I came across a title. It's called "The Boy, the Bread, and the Boat," and that's kind of stuck with me. So that's how we got today's title. It really sums up the gospel lesson that you just heard. Remember, we have that this is a part of the gospel lesson, is a part of Jesus' message to a large crowd. But it's also a lesson. It's an imprint on his disciples. It's trusting God to provide and also trusting him for salvation. If you look at the dictionary, an imprint is a mark made by pressing something onto a softer substance so that its outline is reproduced. But there are other kinds of imprints too. There's imprints that are left by God and imprints that were left by Jesus. To me, these are marks on our hearts, in our minds, and on the earth for us to follow, to show us and others the way of God and the way to heaven. One type of imprint that we saw in the gospel lesson is God providing for his people. We also saw it in Kings, the 2 Kings reading, where Elisha provided for a crowd of people as well and had leftovers. You think about it, the boy, an innocent person, one of the least, provided the food, the bread and the fish. How often do we overlook the value of children? Yet it was a child who brought enough food that fed the whole crowd. The bread, miraculously, it was enough to feed over 5,000 people and had 12 baskets left. I think you can see the symbolism in having 12 baskets because there were 12 disciples and they probably each had a basket. But it's also symbolic that Jesus left enough behind when he died and was resurrected and went to heaven. He left enough bread, spiritual bread, to feed all of humanity with that bread of life. There's a second type of imprint too, salvation, Jesus' saving power, and we saw that with the part about the boat. I'm sure the disciples were afraid when the wind came up and the storm came up, and they were sure that they were going to capsize. They were fearful. And yet here comes Jesus walking across the water. And I imagine at first they didn't know who it was. So that's when he spoke to them and said, "It's I, don't be afraid." And poof, they were at the shore. It's not a magician's trick. It was Jesus saving them from the water. It was Jesus showing them that they did not need to be afraid, that God would always be there with them. I think we need to look for God's imprints all over the place. As I talked about in the children's message this morning, God is everywhere. He's all around us. He's in everything we do and everywhere we go. The scriptures tell us where to find God and how to have a lifelong relationship with him through Christ. And it's our printed imprint, if you would. It's what we have. It's our source book. But do we recognize God providing in our own lives? I know there's been a lot of loaves and fishes moments that I've experienced. Potluck dinners or funeral lunches where everybody's worried there's not going to be enough food. And somehow God provides. There's enough for everyone to eat, and usually there's even some left over. A lot of times we provide as a church family food for families that are in need in our congregation, whether it be through death or someone having an accident or recuperating from surgery or a long illness. And every single time that we seem to do this, there's an abundance of food. This is God's imprint, that he is helping us to provide for other people. And it's a sign that we're doing God's work. A lot of times we'll have friends or church family that show up just at the right time. I don't know how many times I've had some kind of a concern and someone comes to me and takes care of that concern, whatever it happened to be. And I know that it's God sending that person to me to help. And I'm sure you've experienced some of those too. More concrete example of an imprint is a check, an unexpected check. And this again is something that I've experienced many times. I've prayed because there's been times where we've all had financial difficulties of one kind or another, or maybe, just not quite enough money to make the bills at the end of the month. And somehow there's money. A check comes or a payment to you for something, however it comes, it is an imprint from God. It's a gift. And he's showing how he's taking care of you. Do we give God credit for the little things? Or do they just happen? For me, it's God that's making those things happen. And He's sending them to us so that we can have the tools and know how to take care of other people as well. Do we recognize God or Jesus' saving power in our own lives? I read a guidepost story this week. It was about a guy who always parked his car under a certain tree at a certain time of day. And for some reason, he had some car trouble. The car wouldn't start. And he wasn't able to get to that tree and park where he usually did. Well, a branch, a huge branch, which probably would have smashed his car, fell in that place, right where he parks. And somehow, right after that branch fell, his car started. The problem was gone and there was nothing wrong with his car. And I think sometimes, again, that's another saving grace of God, that he was there at that moment to keep him from parking under that tree. And there's lots of other stories of not being in a place for some kind of a reason, whether it be being delayed or something going on at home and you don't get somewhere on time, and it turns out to be a time that you are saved by God. We've all heard stories of miraculous recoveries, disappearances of tumors, people who have been declared dead being brought back to life, and often that is with a life-saving breath from someone else. All of these seem to me to be God moments. God is working through these. It's not us. The doctors will even tell you that a lot of times they have no clue what happened. But we know because we have our faith. Another place that I see God is in mentoring. It seems to be in every area of life people need to be mentored, either to be mentors to someone or to be mentored by someone. And I think that those people leave a lifelong impression on the people that they mentor. And hopefully, if they're doing Christian mentoring, that's going to help that other person to have faith for life. God is constantly at the work of salvation. He's working through earthly matters and through spiritual matters. And there's a third imprint that I'd like you to think about, and this was in the children's message, and that's seeing God's work in our creation. When I went up north for vacation to my mom's cottage, I did something that I've done every year that I've been there since I was a tiny girl. I would sit on the front porch and look out at the lake. We have a beautiful view of Mullet Lake from our cottage. And my grandma, Fry, used to sit with me out there, and she would show me, point out the diamonds or sparkles on the lake. And as I sat there this year, I looked and I just was amazed at God's wonder. The blues, the different shades of blue in the water and in the sky, and the green contrast with the grass and the trees, and the calmness of the water. And I was just fully aware of God's presence at that moment. At the camp, as you heard in the children's message, there were a lot of God sightings. And a lot of relationships were built, especially between those little campers and the adult that came with them for their camp experience. Some of those experiences, especially I think between grandparents and grandchildren, are some that they will never forget and carry with them in their hearts. We all need that time away from the busyness and the noise of everyday life to spend with God. When I think about that camp we had, there was so much beauty in the quietness, the freshness of the woods. To feel the sand between your toes in the water, and finding rocks of all different shapes and sizes, and the sunshine and the rain. It just was an awesome experience, and I hope that all of you sometime will take the time, maybe not necessarily to go to camp, but at least to go out and experience God's creation and nature. Carolyn Graves went with me to camp this year as a storyteller, And of course, she delighted the kids with her stories. But we had a special experience the night before the kids came. We decided to go visit her son, who was living nearby. And it was raining, and it stopped. And we looked out the window of the car, and there was the most gorgeous rainbow we've ever seen, or at least that I've ever seen. It was so intense and so bright. And then, before we just stopped the car because it was just so beautiful. Before we knew it, there was a second rainbow over the top of it. And we just really felt that this was a sign from God that we were doing the right thing and that our camp was blessed, which it really was that week with some beautiful weather. So look for God. This week, our Vacation Bible School is going to leave an imprint on a lot of children, and possibly on their families also. You really should come and see, even if you're not going to be a helper, just come and see the amazing transformation of this church into a wonderland. This year, the theme is sky, which I think is kind of, again, it was something that felt like it went right with all the experiences that I was thinking about. That God's sky is over all of us, no matter where we are, and that can symbolize God's love for us as well. Look for God in the little things, and I challenge you to look for God's imprints in your life and to thank Him for them. I ask you to seek to be God's agents and leave Christ-like imprints wherever you go.